God versus Nature: The Conflict Between Religion and Science in History, by Frederick M. Seiler. Epigraph Books, Rhinebeck, New York, 2020. Read by the author. Preface. Science and religion are both powerful forces in today's world. Science has given us an unprecedented level of understanding of our physical surroundings and even our own nature as living, thinking creatures. Science-based technology has thoroughly transformed the way we live in modern societies, providing an impressive array of life-giving and life-enhancing tools. Religion guides the lives of the vast majority of the population of the earth. Even in relatively secular countries, the lives of most are strongly affected by ideas that come from religion. Whether the power of religion is increasing or decreasing, it is crucial for us to understand its nature and its relation to science. My goal in writing this book has been to create an essentialized overview of the conflict between science and religion throughout history, an overview informed by the fundamental philosophic natures of both science and religion. Numerous thinkers have correctly identified the essential issue as the conflict between faith and reason. However, I disagree that this is the most fundamental philosophic issue. This book was inspired by two famous books from the late 19th century. John William Draper's History of the Conflict Between Religion and Science, and Andrew Dickson White's A History of the Warfare of Science with Theology in Christendom. Both Draper and White correctly saw the fundamental relationship between science and religion to be one of conflict. But unfortunately, both books are flawed. Most notably, they have numerous historical inaccuracies. For this reason, academic historians typically dismiss these accounts as historically worthless. I am aware that the theme of my book goes against the current trend among academic historians of science, who talk disparagingly about an outmoded conflict thesis and who refuse to look for broad patterns in history. But the fact is, there are broad patterns in history, and they can be found by those who are not mired in the myopia and complexity worship of academe. Coming from an atheistic perspective, this book is directed primarily at the non-religious reader who is curious about how and when science and religion have clashed. However, active-minded religious readers may also profit from the book as an intellectual challenge. Given the basic conflict between science and religion, a close look at history reveals some puzzling facts. Science was born in a society that believed in many gods, ancient Greece. Numerous scientific achievements were made in the very religious Islamic world. Modern science was born in a society dominated by Christianity, 17th century Europe. And most scientists in history were religious. How are we to make sense of these facts? How are we to relate them to the broader trajectory of the science-religion relationship from ancient Greece to the present? That is the subject of this book. Introduction. Sometime in the near future, your child may pick up his textbook to learn about the famous scientist Galileo and his confrontation with the Church, and he may read, quote, "The reason Galileo came into conflict with the Church was because of his arrogance and his bad luck, not because of any supposed conflict between science and religion. Science and religion cannot conflict, and they are both valid guides." Unquote. This, of course, is not correct. Galileo's confrontation with the Church, properly understood, is a symbol of a fundamental conflict, the conflict between science and religion, between reason and faith. The idea that science and religion are fundamentally at odds has been called the conflict thesis by historians of science. This image of conflict has been accepted by many throughout the 20th century. But in recent decades, a different view has been accepted by the professionals responsible for understanding this event and others like it. According to many of today's historians of science, there is no basic conflict between science and religion, and there is no evidence for such a conflict in history. Quote, "A historical survey of the relationship between science and religion reveals that they cannot be seen either as natural allies or as natural enemies." Unquote. Quote, "Science and religion interactions in Europe were extremely complex sometimes mutually supportive, sometimes mutually antagonistic, and more often simultaneously supportive and antagonistic, depending on what particular place one occupied within the spectrum of both religious and scientific attitudes, ideas, and practices." Unquote. Quote, "At different phases of their history, science and religion were not so much at war as largely independent, mutually encouraging, or even symbiotic." Unquote. Quote, "The idea that scientific and religious camps have historically been separate and antagonistic is rejected by all modern historians of science." Unquote. The views of today's historians become part of tomorrow's school books, so the conventional Galileo story, the symbol of science-religion conflict, cannot survive long. These historians are missing something crucial and fundamental. This book has been written to address this lacuna. What is the proper way to understand the relationship between religion and science in history? That is addressed in the chapters that follow.